and the leader of the SNP, Alex Salmond, is with us. Very good morning to you. How's your conference going?
Good morning.
Good morning. There's a bit of a delay on the line, but we'll persevere with this. You're publishing this bill, Mr Salmond, on the referendum, but really no prospect of anything happening in this Parliament. You've just heard a great tidal wave of malaise from the people our reporters spoke to. I mean, the fight's gone out of this, hasn't it, really?
Wow. The usual impartiality of the British brainwashing corporation at its best. You know, there's been dozens, perhaps hundreds of opinion polls in Scotland over the last few years, and including up until the last few weeks, who've asked the question, do you want to have a referendum on independence? Every single one of them shows a massive majority of people in Scotland in favour of an independence referendum. But only the BBC could manage not to find that majority in your incredibly scientific analysis on the underground.
OK.
I really do think if you're going to try and detect Scottish opinion, maybe your reporter should come up more often.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, let's not even deal with the train carriage diplomacy that we saw there, but let's talk about some of the psephologists at Strathclyde University, what they have been saying. I mean, that isn't something even within our postal code here. This is in your own backyard, and what they're saying is after 10 years of Scottish Parliament, Mr Salmond, the proportion wanting independence has never been lower. They put it at 37% at Strathclyde. The proportion against never higher at 54%. Are you going to pick a fight with them as well?
No, but I'll just point out that 54-37 is not a huge gap, incidentally. I mean, it's quite true. We've seen some polls showing an independence majority. Even this year, for example, we saw a poll showing an independence majority when set in a European context. But surely the way to determine this is to have the referendum and let the people of Scotland decide. And don't you think it's kind of passing strange that the parties which are opposed to independence are the ones who currently are also opposed to letting the people of Scotland decide on independence? You'd think if they were so confident of the outcome, they'd be more enthusiastic about having the referendum. I speak to you as the First Minister of Scotland in a Scottish government which is riding high in the opinion polls and the most popular party in Scotland. I've been at this conference in previous years when people in the BBC said there would never be a Scottish Parliament. There is a Scottish Parliament. It's been here for 10 years.
OK,
I've been at previous conferences where the people in the BBC... Well, let me finish the point, because, you're asking...
Well, I want to get a question in as well, Mr Salmond. We've got limited time.
Well, I'll try and bring it to a close then and just make the point that there would never be the Government of Scotland. I'm the First Minister of Scotland. So I just think the track record of getting the Parliament, winning the election, being popular in the opinion polls, entitled us not to agreement, but perhaps to a little bit more respect for our opinions than sometimes the BBC in London managed to accumulate, whether it's talking about this or indeed whether talking to us about whether or not we've got the right to be in a broadcast debate in a general election campaign when we're the most popular party in Scotland.
With absolute respect for you, and also the fact that time is ticking away, let me try and get this in. I mean, the question itself that you're asking is very, very interesting. That Scotland should negotiate a settlement with the government of the UK so that Scotland becomes independent. I mean, surely a referendum on independence should be a really much more straightforward question than that, yes or no. Why is it somewhat softer?
Well, that's a yes or no question, incidentally. There's one box says yes and one box says no. It's actually very closely modelled on the devolution referendum question of 1997, which was set by the then Labour government. So a question of that nature, that question asked about the white paper on devolution and then asked for a yes or no. So I think when people start to quibble what is a perfectly reasonable question and what we are asking, consulting the people on, and remember it is a consultation, that's not an unreasonable question to ask. And if the other parties are so confident about the outcome, then why wouldn't they embrace the democratic instinct of allowing the people of Scotland the opportunity to determine our own constitutional future? I don't think that's too unreasonable.
Well, let me turn to my panel here. John Campner, you're all for a referendum. A referendum on this sort, or a more robust question than this?
Well, I'm certainly with Alex Salmond on the point that he makes. I mean, as a defender of free speech and constitutional reform, I couldn't be anything else. There should be a referendum, and then let the voters of Scotland determine the outcome of that referendum. So that's not to say that one is in favour of independence or not. But for goodness sake, they have a duly elected SNP government, one of whose main remits is to fight for independence. It's entirely legitimate for the SNP, therefore, to ask that question of the electorate.
Ian Dale?
I totally agree. I think Alex Salmond was elected on a mandate with a referendum. If I was one of the other parties, I'd say, well, OK, go ahead, have your referendum, which you will probably lose, and then accept the result of it. But I think it's very amusing that he accuses you of brainwashing when he's got him standing by a banner saying we've got what it takes.
Well, look, banners and brainwashing aside, Mr. Salmond, just...
Not the BBC banner.
No.
That's what else.
It is not the BBC banner. Of that, we can be sure. Just finally, Mr. Salmond, why are you praying for a hung parliament? Tell me.
Oh, because it would maximise Scotland's influence. I mean, if we can get that SNP bloc, that Scottish bloc of 20 MPs, which we'd have had in the European election results this year, then a hung parliament would give us a decisive role and enable us to extract significant social and economic concessions for Scotland, and indeed to protect Scotland from the sort of cuts that Tory or Labour governments are intending over the next few years. So that would give Scotland a decisive role. We could hang Westminster by a Scottish rope.
Right, OK. I mean, there's so much more we could talk to you about, and I do enjoy talking to you, but unfortunately we'll leave it there.